So, if you want to be an entrepreneur and you want to, you want financial independence to be on the other side of that. I do not believe that VC backed startup is the best way to couple your path to financial independence. I do believe that certain ideas, you should absolutely use other people's money. But when you're coming from a point of financial independence and stability, you just move differently. I don't believe in the halfway. And so, have one of those like deep honesty moments with yourself and say, are you committed? If you are committed, I believe the next step is to find whatever is the right framework for you to break up with your ego.
Talk to me about what your investments look like and what the CAGR thesis is. I mean, why you? Give me your elevator pitch for why someone should accept your dollars and what your model is.
So I've done 12 deals, and almost all of those deals have been service companies to start. It's not a secret, on how I tackle that. It's just cash on cash. I want it to be fairly high. And I want it to get a sense of where my process might be broken. Right. And so these are companies that you can assess the financials very easily. And they don't sell for very high multiples. So I can buy many of these for cheap. So everything from a visual identity firm, a product strategy firm, bought a web app development firm and reposition them to focus on building conversational products. Like these are not kind of complicated businesses, but then there's some other businesses. One is a collegiate NIL product that connects marketers to creators, and it's just kind of web app to SMS, and it's really kind of thinking about can you make influencer interactions as turnkey and simple as buying pay-per-click ads, right? Like that's the problem with influencer ads today. There's all this back and forth conversation, and so many of these are taking something that was already working at a very, very small scale. And really, it's just like the team is assembled, right? Like that's the part that I'm most interested in. And there's enough kind of history there to go and tackle this. And then from there, say, all right, make this strategic shift. And I just want you to focus in a more narrow basis. So those are the deals that have been done to date. What I'm now doing is adding two pieces. Like those were very sporadic. If you're like, LaSean, where's the thesis? It's like I needed deal flow. I needed to learn. I just basically bought the math. And now as I get a bit more mature, I am looking for local businesses that I have a very kind of clear checklist. It's not super complicated on what type of local B2B businesses focus primarily on things related to construction, or that could be augmented with prop tech. I'm just very interested in that space. So much of that industry is in high demand, but has labor constraints. And so there's just a ton of ways where if you can add more efficiency, you're going to push up the margins just because people are willing to pay more. But a lot of times, these folks are booked out, or they're really bad at quoting, or like there's all these like low hanging fruit things that, again, a large platform company is going to ignore. But if you really kind of focus your energy, you can go tackle those. And then the other piece that as I said, in that experiment with the solopreneurs, I'm looking at ideas where we have strong signal that, a problem has been identified in an existing customer segment. And so rather than say, here's the problem to solve, it is hiring an operator and say, I want you to go productize, if you've heard the phrase community-led growth, products that have this CLG type framework. And so the short version of that, I now call these OBCs, outcome-based communities, where you're identifying a customer segment, a market that is looking for a very explicit transformation. And then rather than say, I sell X, you're trying to give them a freemium path to move through that with content and DIY resources. And then there's a done for you amplifier that comes along that journey. And so solopreneurs is where we're going to start first. But we have a whole list of things. Like I'm very bullish on aging. I call it aging in style. People are getting older. there are certain boomers, maybe even Gen X folks who have a lot of disposable income, and they want the Tesla experience of getting older. They don't want to be in some, janky, active living facility, or have these unqualified folks doing their preventative medicine. Like, there's just all of these spaces where someone's going through some transformation. And the powerful part of this is, if you build these types of communities, they become your social proof. They become your word of mouth. They become all the pieces that you're going to have to spend money on anyway. You're just inverting the triangle, and you're starting with the humans and the conversations and the pain points, validating the market, and then figuring out what you sell them. And so my goal is to identify these object based communities, or outcome based communities, and then from there go look at, do I need to buy this book? Do I need to go buy this little micro SaaS company? Do I need to buy, all these pieces to help people move through their journey? And since it's a true community, there's real human faces here. This isn't like, click here and it's like has some crazy, fast music, video trailer. And it's like, but whose LinkedIn can I click through to see who's like actually behind this? What have they done before? When can I talk to other people who are on this journey along with me? And so those are kind of the three buckets. Just buying pure cash on services side, looking for these established companies that I can kind of turn around with audience and automation. And then this third one is definitely the most risky. But I really need to get some reps to learn, how can I invest in communities, and these OBCs I think are a good way for me to exercise.
When you do invest, first of all, I appreciate kind of the three buckets, and you could even see you haven't. I think you've been doing this for maybe a year or so, but you can see the evolution of your thesis of kind of, okay, well, let me start with safe, easy bets, right? Low cost,
Right.
cash on cash businesses. Okay, let me dip a toe a little bit more into this particular vertical with prop tech and construction tech and areas there. And then you're kind of evolving with, okay, well, faces are important. Communities are kind of an extension of that. Where can I kind of dip my toe deeper in? Maybe it's a little bit more risky, but you also have a more defined thesis at this point. So maybe if we could just dive into where you show up. So obviously you're bringing a check, and please correct me if I'm wrong on how long you've been doing these investments, but
Yeah.
you obviously bring cash. But then you've also alluded to some aspect where no, you're not coming in as the person's manager, right? You're not probably taking majority stake, but you're coming in. You also are bringing expertise. You're identifying opportunities for maybe we can make this person the face of the business. We can bring a memo culture. We can bring document culture. Where are you showing up? What value are you bringing besides the check, and how involved or how not involved are you when you do invest?
Yeah. Well, going back to the happily failed fine salads example, one of the things I've learned is to stay out of the business, like to either go all in and say I own this, or to like get all the way out and be like I'm here to support, but the roles and responsibilities are very clear. Because when I've tried to do something in the middle, it just hasn't worked out properly, and the leader's confused or frustrated, and they're like, "Oh, how did I let this dude convince me to quit my job to come do this thing?" And so that's just a learning that I've had to remind myself. But getting back to kind of the evolution, one of the things that I'm hyper focused on is, what am I learning from my existing businesses that help me make the next decision at higher confidence and higher quality. And one of those is I really obsess over the P&L. What are the line items that are already on that P&L that like we keep paying for? And then instead of saying like, well, what's the most expensive thing? Like that's the TAM, like that's the place to go solve the problem. I'm looking for volatility, because I believe that where you can introduce predictability into that line item, that is where there's a lot of value. And so it's not surprising that marketing and sales, have a lot of fluctuation. And the more you can get that dialed in, I mean, you see this when SaaS companies are scaling efficiently. I think Klaviyo that, went public earlier this year, like that's a good example of, and they just had those numbers dialed in, right? Like their unit economics were very tight. They understand all the basics on CAC, LTV, blah, blah, blah. Like they really understand how to like run that company on a numbers based. And so anytime I see a lot of fluctuations in what's being spent, that's an opportunity to either fix it in that company because they're just doing it wrong, or to identify in this industry, there's something weird where this is inconsistent from a cash flow standpoint. And so the reason that's valuable is when I go back and say, all right, what type of product are we going to attempt to build, or what type of person am I going to bring into this? I'm trying to figure out how well does this person know this particular pain point, because that's another thing I learned. I tried to hire folks that they were missing like the deep domain expertise and the learning on the job, even though maybe these folks had a ton of experience. It was just horrible, right?
Really smart
Or
people don't know the industry, not necessarily
yeah.
a good fit.
Another thing we had, this is somebody I knew very well, and fortunately it worked out on both sides. But they had run very large organizations, and this company was like 9 people, and it's just like it was horrible, right? Because effectively this person just had 9 directs. I don't know if they had that few people, even just in the direct line, in the last few jobs they had. And so they just didn't have the toolkit. It was rusty. It was just like, it was just all bad, So anyway, what I have found is my job is to be the kind of recon person. I'm like going out into the mountain pass, looking over, researching, doing the things that are highly unstructured, whether that's talking to strangers, it's like traveling to places, it's reading books, listening to podcasts. It's like I'm trying to figure out where is there an opportunity where, and you may have heard a version of this, where I have a contrarian view that is positive to how most people view the world, right? This is why I'm so bullish on AI. Like, I don't believe AGI is as close as maybe some of the extreme people believe. But regardless of our trajectory and velocity to something like that, I just fundamentally don't believe that AGI would see the world through the lens of scarcity. I think that's a uniquely human, kind of viewpoint. And, if you think about what are we most constrained by today, like one of the biggest ones is energy. Like if you could invent unlimited energy, so much of our resources, so much of the wars that we fight, like so many problems we have would get sorted out, because now you could grow more food, you could build cheaper houses, like everything could just get cheaper, cheaper, cheaper. And the idea that the AI wants to enslave us because there's no more stuff left. Like, no, they would just figure out how to make like super cheap houses out of sand and ocean water and like whatever, right? And so I'm very bullish I really try to find areas where I am bullish on something that most people think is like a negative. And then that's where I want to go dig in. So that's a big chunk of my time. And then once I find a deal or I find an opportunity, my next step is all about talent. And I got to figure out who's the human that's going to actually go and run this, or if it's somebody who's going to stay. On 2 of the 12 deals that the leader has stayed, one did not stay very long. They left like 6 months after the deal, and I got stuck. And like now I'm there like for like a month. I was like pseudo kind of interim leader, and like I was like, all right, this sucks. Don't do this again. Like I don't want to do this. So anyway, so then it's a talent play. And then after that, what I try to do, I write a lot of internal memos. We have a Google Drive. It's not sophisticated like some type of knowledge base or whatever. It's not even a Notion. And on
Get an AI for that at some point.
Yeah, maybe.
Do.
And so once or twice a week, I write, typically a 2 to 6, sometimes it goes a little bit longer, page memo on some point of view. And it's like, this is where I believe the world is going. And all the operators need to read that. There's a Slack where they are all together, and it's not like a synergy where you got co-sell your thing to the other business. I don't think that really works, especially at this small scale. However, I do think it's almost like a mastermind group, right? Where everybody gets to trade notes and say like, like, how are you measuring success? What's your experiment velocity? And like, those are the things that are more useful. And so getting to the very practical, tactical piece, for every investment, I have one-on-one with the leader, and I attend or read the weekly business review for that team. And so that's kind of my cadence. And we use phantom shares to incentivize other team members. And so that is that's something that was used in co-ops and collectives years ago, and it's kind of like started to come back into popularity.
And that's specifically sharing equity between all the portfolio companies. Is that what phantom shares are, or is it something else?
Yeah, so it's on a company basis, and you can think of it as like a modern take on profit sharing. And so I want to incentivize folks to stick around, but if these companies are going to, it's permanent capital. There's no IPO. We're not going to sell the business. So how to like what would equity mean? You know what I'm saying? And so instead, we carve out the equivalent of an employee pool. It's actually a little more generous because again, these are, it's like buying a house in a fancy neighborhood where you're buying for appreciation versus buying a house in like a B or C neighborhood and you're buying for the cash flow. These are cash flow companies, and so I can't say like, well, I'm going to give you these fake shares that you can never sell, and I'm only going to give you a small percentage. Like that's just disrespectful. So instead, I'll carve off as low as 10, as high as 30, and the goal is if you meet these requirements, you get another percentage, and you keep that percentage of the profit share as long as you're employed. And when you quit, then that goes back into the pool, right? And so that way, I'm never like diluting or doing something weird with that. And on the flip side, folks really have a real sense of ownership to go drive that number. I've seen a couple of experiments for some other companies. There's actually a firm that is actually it's kind of a PE structure. They're buying companies and letting the employees do earnouts, where they actually will let them buy down the PE firm's position if certain financial thresholds get hit. And so I haven't done anything like that, but I'm like super interested in these types of experiments, and I love that people are starting to be public around the conversations on how they're experimenting with these. But I found this phantom stock model works very well. There's a very well-known legal structure for it in the U.S., so you're not like inventing some new type of paperwork. And so both the employee and the owner is satisfied. And I can also extend this to contractors in certain situations, right? And so like you can't give a contractor RSU or something like that, right? And so there's all sorts of ways where like I'm just trying to figure out how to articulate the goal of the company, how we are going to measure that. We use OKRs. I know some people like and dislike that, but like I just need numbers. I want to say like, let's agree on what we're going to measure, what the target is, and then let's talk about why that's getting hit or not. And then I can kind of work back, on how I want to support, but I can stay out of your business on execution, right? And so that's this current version, and hopefully I'm just learning. And so if we talked again in the future, I'd have a more refined version. But I found that a couple times a week touch points, me taking all of my randomness and trying to distill it down into something that folks can read in 15, 30, 45 minutes. Those are the best ways that I can contribute, and they also don't drain my energy where I'm in a bunch of meetings where it's not super productive and I'm like why? Like I don't need to be on a performance review call. Like I don't need to add any value there.
One of the things that we talked about before we started the show was how you're intentional with your time, specifically making sure you have time to think. And obviously, some of that time is going into writing memos, it's going to other areas, but a de-emphasis on meeting culture, which is kind of the most default mode that I think most companies trend towards, is meetings. How have you adapted your life to carve out that intentional time? Do you have tactics, tips, suggestions on how to achieve that and how to kind of shift your organization to maybe be less on the meeting culture and more on the let's think, let's make decisions, or let's think through it, let's write it down, let's discuss, and then decide?
Sure. So on the meeting piece specific, I have a rule that if you invite LaSean to a meeting, the agenda needs to call out what my role of the meeting is. Is it there to approve something? Am I there to discuss something? Am I there to be informed? Right.
What
And it's just
action
very
is LaSean
straightforward.
taking?
Yeah. And so it forces the team to also be thoughtful. Like, it's like, just modeling behavior. I see them doing it as well. And so what I don't want is someone to schedule a meeting and then they just tell me what was in, some snapshot of data. I'm like, just send me the link to the dashboard, dude. Like, I don't like, why do you need to tell me how to click around this dashboard? And that's another thing that this is more of an aside, but I tend to hire more technical folks in non-technical roles, just because like we can be more self-sufficient. So we don't have a Tableau or Power BI or any kind of tool like that. Everybody writes their own SQL queries. It's just a very simple thing. And it's just like, get in the data and write your own query. Like, I'm not hiring a BI analyst or somebody to go make a report for you. And it's one of those things that, for some folks, they're like, ooh, other people, they're like super energized, but I just don't want the extra friction. So just don't do that. So making sure the meetings have an agenda is super important. Then, there's a sentence. There's usually 1 to 2 sentences where it's just like, this is what this meeting is about. And many times, so my admin, she's like kind of trained, she's really great because people are like she's so okay being the bad cop. But she's like, does LaSean really need to attend this? Can you send the doc? Right. And it's just like, it's just forcing this thing. And what I found is, and I don't know that this can be extrapolated, so I don't want to pretend this is like general advice, but some people really work better when they have more moments to connect on a human level. And I'm like, okay, that's cool. Let's just say that. And let's not pretend we need this fake meeting for you to have more FaceTime or to talk about things or what have you. And so, if there's
It's
somebody
totally
who,
fine if you need that, but let's be clear about what the
yeah,
intention of the meeting is. It's
let's
not
call
to
that that.
necessarily achieve something.
Yeah.
Exactly.
I've had, folks tell me in the past when I was managing very large teams, it's just like, we want better top-down clarity on strategic vision or what have you. This is one of the reasons I do a lot of writing nowadays, because I got that feedback. Because I would do like all hands or fireside chats, and like I would like pick some hypo, a high potential person on my org, and then they would come and like interview me, and then like we talk about but then it'd be like some 60-90 minute conversation that would end up on like the recording and our our SharePoint, whatever. And it was like nobody would watch that thing, right? And so like you get like 30% attendance, the others never watch it. Like, yeah, it's just like it's a bad artifact. And so part of the reason I write also is to like give people like, this is what I'm thinking. I'm not saying it's right, but like we're going to all march down here, and when we get data that we should go shift somewhere else, then we'll make another move. And again, I'm staying at the problem set market level, and then the leader is on the like, what's the actual product solution that we're actually going to go build there. Anyway, back to the tactics. One other thing I do that's also calendar related is something called calendar journaling. I'm obsessive with this, and so this is one of these things that, again, I'm not giving this as advice as other people should share or should go follow, but they may want to find their own version of this. But for the last 2.5, 3 years, and I did it for about another year before I broke the streak. But my current streak is about 2.5, 3 years, where I go back and refactor my calendar for everything, for how I actually spent my time, and I do it in 15-minute increments. And so if you can go back and look at my calendar. Some people do this with 2 calendars. I don't like to diff it, and I just like go and use my same calendar. And so I don't have to buy another piece of software. I can do it on my phone. I can do it on my laptop, like whatever. It's just using my Google Workspace calendar account. And it forces me to say, am I spending the time on the things that I actually said were important? And it's like, and I do it 2 or 3 times a day. It takes me just seconds, but I do it for my personal life as well. And I'm looking at this, and there's usually 2 flags. I'm procrastinating and I'm lying to myself. And I said, hey, I was supposed to be researching for this category, but now I'm learning on YouTube or something that is just a cheat. Or I'm just so bad at that.
Air quotes on the learning on YouTube. I'm bad at that one too.
I mean, because I get a dopamine hit out of doing it, and then I can tell myself, oh, I'm learning something right now, but not necessarily taking action. But the other thing that it helps me do is I color code my calendar. And so I do it. My admin does it like, and it's not a sophisticated system. It's like travel. There's meeting times, there's scheduled times. And so if it's internal schedule, it has one color. If I'm on, a show like yours, it'd have another color. So basically it's like, who are the humans that I'm interacting with? And I have a kind of a color scan, and then some personal colors for, time with family and everything. But the purpose of the color coding is for me to scan. And what I found is the more those colors get mixed in, the higher the context switching, the less productive I am. And so I'm looking to minimize context switching. And so these are just some of the like very, very tactical things that I do to kind of keep myself honest. And the more I let myself breathe and have blocks of time to like actually finish a book, not just start it, to, drive out somewhere crazy, to grab lunch or coffee, to be inspired by, I like to look on the map in my city and say, like, I've never been to this place, or I only went out here one time. Like, if I give myself time to go do that, I'm in the car listening to podcasts, I'm at a coffee shop I've never been to, I see a store that inspires me. Like, there's some serendipitous moment that happens. And if I'm just hyper focused on ultimate productivity, I find I'm just putting myself in this repetitive, homogenous loop. And like, that does no good to how I can hopefully add value to the portfolio.
I think that's extremely fascinating, and just the intentionality that you have to track your time, essentially to update your calendar as you're living your life, so that you can have you can have data, right? Because at the end of the day, you need the data points to be able to reflect on what's working, what's not working, where's my time going, is it efficient, is it effective, to again show up more intentionally and more effectively in all aspects of your life.
Yeah, and I'll add to that, I really have come to beat this mantra of intentionality over productivity. And so folks who are like, "Oh, LaSean, that just sounds like you're working all the time," and I'm not down with hustle culture. And like, I don't care if you work 4 hours, 40 hours, 80 hours. Like, I don't care what the time is. I do believe we should and can be more intentional in how we spend our minutes. It's like a bank account, right? And so the same way you spend dollars, you're spending your life minutes. And like, if you look at my calendar, there's blocks where it's like, wow, LaSean watched Netflix for 2.5 hours. Like, there's no shame in what the time is. It's just do it on purpose. And so it's not about, I need to be productive all the time. No, you should be as intentional as often as possible.
There's a there's a very real psychological thing that happens when you measure. I'm sure there's some name or phenomenon for it, but when you measure something, just the act of measuring it alone can change the outcome. And so one of the examples that I've heard ages ago is someone who was trying to lose weight, they were overweight. They just started getting on the scale every day, and they
Mm.
hadn't before, because there's shame in that, there's guilt, you feel bad, etc. They didn't exercise, they didn't change their diet, they didn't do anything differently, but just by getting on the scale every single day, seeing what that KPI, seeing what that number was, that alone, I think they dropped some crazy number, I don't know, 20% or 30% of the weight, whatever it is. The simple act of measuring makes us, almost forces us to be more intentional,
There it
because
is.
it's in front of us. And
Right.
I think it's a phenomenal lesson. I've seen it also on the personal finance side of just looking at your bank account each day, reminding yourself that you're not where you want to be, or maybe you are
Right.
where you want to be and you're trying to stay there. Living intentionally, I think that is a phenomenal lesson, and it's
Yeah.
cool to hear the
Well,
very tactical things you're doing to
yeah,
bring
yeah,
that
and
to your
I think
life.
most of these things can be really simple. Again, I don't think my toolbook or toolkit is everyone's toolkit, but maybe there's some ways you can refine it. But I was going to give you a quick story. When I was, trying to figure out the next stage of my life, it's not uncommon for people who work in big tech to end up, doing investments. But the way I do it is somewhat atypical. And I did. You were talking about how long have I been doing this? I've done angel investing for over a decade. I've done, probably about 30 plus deals, somewhere in that range. And I just didn't like it. Right. I just didn't enjoy angel investing. I know some folks like really get energized by it. But I think the path for angel investing mostly is you use it to get energy, to learn, to get connected. It's more of a kind of a mentoring, kind of capacity. But if you keep your day job, sometimes it can keep you plugged into what's new and what's blowing up, or you become a super angel and eventually a VC. Like, to me, I think those are really the real paths, because just like venture, you don't really know if you're good as an angel for, 6, 7 years, right? I mean, you get these paper markups and you're like, "Woo, I'm smart," but like, no, and you don't know if you actually did it, or if like you just, got lucky. Like, there's just so much, confusion on assessing whether you're good at that. And but through that process, about a year before I left big tech, I just assumed I would go in VC. And so I did what many folks did. I leveraged my network to get into some of these. There are these cohort-based kind of VC training groups. They're kind of like the equivalent of like a entrepreneurship in residence program. There are these, unmarketed programs that they basically teach people how to be VCs when they're transitioning, usually from finance or from technology. And so I'd gotten a couple of these. They help you, give you an instant network and like do all these things. They're like, we're going to grow you up from angel investor to VC investor. And I kept looking at the kind of the payoff and the salary and the amount of work and like what's the actual day to day. And I was like, man, so much of this stuff is just fundraising versus actually talking to the entrepreneurs. And I was like that does not sound fun. Like, number one. Number two, the best opportunities I had were either to go raise my own fund, right? And so that's like all you're doing is fundraising, and then you're going to raise some, pitty little $50-100 million. And now you got to really hump early on in your first, class to be able to get your next fund in place. And so like, I was just like, oh, that doesn't sound fun.
And it's like a 10-year commitment because you have to do at least 3 funds before you start seeing
yes,
how the
exactly,
first
right? Like you can't bail on those LPs, like not even just from a moral standpoint, like legally you cannot bail it. You have a fiduciary duty. And then, so that I was like, all right, well, I have some great relationships with some strong funds. And, in those situations, for folks who don't know, you usually do a buy-in. So you have to buy into the fund because you're showing up as a GP. Like when everybody else is like, we already did the work. Like, you're just going to come here, like get some of this carry. And there's carry discounts and all these other things that folks do. But, I got pretty far along with the firm, and, the team was pretty good and everything, but it was a $2.5 million buy-in. And I was like, psychologically, I was like I'm paying $2.5 million to buy a job. Like, I was like, this doesn't feel right. It's just so crazy. And so they were very great to work with, and they understood why I said no and blah, blah, blah. And we got to, I kind of moved on. But then being intentional, just kind of sticking with this theme, I started doing the math and said like, okay, if I'm going to take 2.5 of my money, plus if a really great deal comes up in the, at that firm, and I want to go invest some of my money alongside, I'm probably playing with about $5 million of my own money. And I had done some work or some investments in real estate, done a couple spec houses. That's gambling. I don't think most people should do that. I would not do that again. I got lucky. I did some independent films. And that's also very dangerous if you're not basically pre-selling the distribution rights. And so I was like looking at all these different asset classes, and what I really took away was when I got outside of software, there's so many other places where the cash on cash return was so much faster. And like, oh, like, duh, this feels so elementary. And so that's how it kind of all came full circle. I was like, well, why don't I just take this money and go look at structural deals in an industry I understand that don't need to go get on this crazy VC rat race. And I can just really stay focused on the fundamentals of free cash flow, FCF, as the number one metric. And so when I got really intentional about looking at those, I was like, oh, wow, there's not that many of these deals, but there are deals out here like this. And as soon as I got, kind of hyper-focused around that, the clarity that I could move was very, very simple. And then I got very fortunate that during this exploratory process on me potentially raising a small fund, 2 family offices said, hey, we'll come and give you debt lines for any deals that you can't fund out of your own pocket. And so now that's kind of the structure of the business, where I have my dollars that are doing the most risky bets, and then if I do need any overage, I have these 2 family offices I can tap. And so again, all of this is just like a learning process. I'm like a baby in this whole little game. But it's just been really fantastic to kind of see there's a whole nother lane. If you like ignore the TechCrunch articles for startup founders, you ignore, the pitch book, conference that's going to tell you about, how so-and-so's fun is like the greatest thing. And that's who's really going to give you the best, GP support. And you need to get them on your cap table. Like, most of this stuff is just storytelling, right? Like, no knock
very
to folks
loud,
like,
very
like Andreessen Horowitz when they went crazy on their media business. I think it's brilliant, right? Like they started a podcast and they did all these things. But there's a reason.
Is right up there too with
exactly. There's a reason that they're marketing so heavily. They're just pulling that media as one of the 4 types of leverage, right? And if you only hear that signal, you're going to think there's no other way. And my point is, and again, we can go back to maybe Rob Walling split. Most folks, if they have the right discipline when they're chasing product market fit, they put more time into the market and the fit part. Building the product will take less capital. And for many folks, whether you're in the 1% or the 9%, you probably don't need the most aggressively motivated capital, because that capital will probably take you down a road or put you on the freeway and you're like, I'm just in a bicycle. Well, I can't drive 80 miles an hour. This is not, it's like, yes, but we have to get there. And so they're just, reminding ourselves that when we are intentional, we give ourselves space to think, we can start to tune out all this noise, and the obvious path is probably not the best path. It's just maybe the most comfortable or the most convenient. And just, finding the confidence to go on the unbeaten path, I think is quite empowering.
I might have to steal that analogy of the little startup that built some tech on a bicycle, and then the VC is like, time to go on the highway, buddy. Time to pedal faster. It's very visual. In terms of just the, there's the 80%, so maybe 80% of the value, at least from a lot of investment perspective, and even from the entrepreneurs, what the value is generated for the entrepreneur might just be in that smaller play, right? That smaller play that produces cash on cash return, that maybe isn't going to have a $1 billion exit, but it's going to produce free flowing cash. It's going to grow naturally. It's going to be cash on cash return. And even in terms of the product market fit, the validation, one lens that I've often used when talking with people who want to be tech entrepreneurs, because that's what is, the narrative is tech entrepreneurship is the thing. That's the cool thing. That's how to be the billionaire. That's where all the money is. A lens that I use is, I say, almost every single tech product, unless there's some, deep tech that's extremely unique or machine learning modeling, most technology and most products can be boiled down to a spreadsheet, a phone, pen and paper, and that's it, right? So with those tools alone, I mean, if you take Uber as an example, Uber is basically, you call up a bunch of people that have their taxi drivers or they drive limos. You say, okay, would you be open to driving cars at some point? You write down their names and phone numbers. You say, great. And then you can just start calling people, or you can text all your friends and say, hey, whenever you would get a taxi normally, just shoot me a text. I'll send a limo to pick you up. And you can literally just put all that in a spreadsheet, and you can text and phone call. And that's the entire business model. Now, does it scale? No. But you've spent $0 and you've built the MVP of Uber, right? And you can apply to Airbnb. You can apply to most of these services, most of these companies that are out there. You can just kind of boil it down to a very simple model. And yet we think that we need, okay, I need a custom mobile app. I need to do some branding. I need to have my launch. I need to have marketing dollars. And I need all these things. And in reality, just put a little bit of sweat in there, figure out there's that product market fit in the truest sense of market and the truest sense of fit, right? And then eventually the product can become way better than just your spreadsheet and your phone.
100%. I love, so you said calculator, phone, spreadsheet. Was there a fourth?
Pen and paper, spreadsheet,
the document.
Phone.
Yeah.
I mean, just
it's
that's
so
all you need,
smart.
right? And it's really maybe just spreadsheet and phone. Yeah.
I'm gonna
phone has the calculator, so
I'm gonna in one of my next mentoring sessions, I'm gonna share that with some of the young folks who are trying to overcomplicate the world. So thank you for that. On this journey, I do believe that we can tell ourselves there's something missing, so we don't hold ourselves accountable. And you just kind of described, I forget what it's called, but it's equivalent of man in the box. It's from the late 1800s, where there was like some famous demo that people made it look like it was some magical AI type box. And there's actually a little human in there and was like answering the questions, right? And this actually has a name. There's a story to this. I'm sure there's a Wikipedia entry, but there's nothing wrong with that approach, right? Like you could just be the man or woman in the box. And if the value is there, people will still give you the money, right? And I think that's so important. And through that process, again, you might find that you can stay in control for a lot longer. What I see in folks romanticizing entrepreneurship, especially VC-backed entrepreneurship, again, I'm not really opposed to the VC world. I just think, if you're going to be playing with casino owners, you need to have some leverage, right? Like you don't go in there and, get on the slots or the roulette, table. Like you will lose your shirt. Like the odds are in their favor. And the idea that, even treating VC-backed startups as the way to make the most money, I think, is a silly lie that that great storytellers have been telling. In most cases, you can get to a much more predictable, first couple $100,000 or first 2 million doing some of these much more simple businesses. And the reason I like to remind folks about that is, if you have $2 million post tax, number one, you have more liquidity than most of your favorite entrepreneurs on the internet. They're
Even
cash
at the
poor.
$100 million validation or valuation. Yeah.
Yes, right, because they don't have liquidity, and many times the cap table is so convoluted, and there's like liquidation preferences and all these different things that you're like, oh, you sold your business for 100 million. But I've seen this happen. I won't say the name of the company, but I had a buddy who sold a company at for tens of millions of dollars, and money wired in his bank account was about 600,000. And it's just like,
Not to mention
this is,
all the stress and suffering and fundraising and
yes,
pitching
it's like,
and
this is
years of his
crazy.
life.
So, if you want to be an entrepreneur and you want to, you want financial independence to be on the other side of that, I do not believe that VC backed startup is the best way to couple your path to financial independence. Now, once you become financially independent, this is where, I'm not on either side of the fence. I think it's a order of operations. I do believe that certain ideas, you should absolutely use other people's money. But when you're coming from a point of financial independence and stability, you just move differently. And the idea that some of these businesses and the capital stack that we've been talking about today can be maybe part of your earlier journey, I just think it's so empowering, because when you get to this whole formula we've been circling around, like that everyone talks about on product market fit, you may realize, like, I only need 125,000, and you're like, huh. Well, I'm just going to spend that myself, right? And then this is what I kept coming back to. I was like, when you actually do the work the right way, you're going to realize the check size isn't that large. And if you've done the work to get your personal finances in order, you might be able to just fund the first, second, or third. And this idea is a lie. Like, you want to talk about where I get really frustrated with some of my peers who are in the VC side and the PE side of the business. It's like, oh, you should never spend your own money. Like, that's ridiculous. They are trying to. I heard a GP tell me one time, this few years ago. Um, he was like, "Well," I was like, "Why are you guys spending so much on this EIR program? Your entrepreneurs in residence?" And he's like, "Oh, well, talent, blah blah blah." Like the same story you normally hear. And like, I was like, I need a 5 why here. Like, this doesn't make sense to me. And the summary of the conversation is, their firm saw founders as employees. And it's like, we just need to hire more employees, and our control of the cap table, our structure of the board, where we come in on the round, how the term sheet is structured, equivalently, turns these folks into employees. And you get
That's
all the
interesting.
ego as the entrepreneur, and you get all the stuff, like, you're doing all the work, you're under all the stress, you're like, and then meanwhile, somebody is like chilling in their nice office, and they are throwing some little party at the hotels. I'm sure you've been to these things where it's like you go to some fancy hotel that's in like nondescript, and it's not flashy on purpose, right? But they're making everybody feel special and like all of these things, and we're having private talks, and you get to meet this really important person who's going to open a door for you in your next growth round, like blah blah blah. What does that sound like to me? That's the same way they used to treat me as an executive at big tech. Like, those are both employees, right? And so I really, really, try to remind folks that you have autonomy, you have agency, you are in control. And the more you control the front side of your business, the early stages, the more optionality you're going to have. And if you decide to take on venture capital, go for it. But do it from a point or place of strength, not from desperation.
So, LaSean, one of the things that we've been talking about is the different types of businesses, right? Maybe only 1% should actually be pursuing venture capital, 1% are maybe justified in needing kind of that bigger accelerant, going for that billion-dollar valuation. But there are a lot of entrepreneurs who have, for better or for worse, kind of started down that path. They've raised a seed round, friends and family seed extension, Series A, etc. What advice would you have for those entrepreneurs who have maybe started down the VC journey, maybe are having second doubts, maybe their business isn't going to be the $1 billion thing that they set out to be, but there's still value there. There's still a business. They still have found some resonance, some product market fit. What advice do you have for them for maybe shifting or adjusting their business or adjusting their approach to capital?
Yeah, that's an interesting place that many founders are in right now. So this isn't a hypothetical. I have had multiple conversations on startups, and this isn't my sweet spot, but I entertain different conversations. Startups that are for sale that have built some interesting software but haven't found product market fit. And we see the write downs and the markdowns right now in the market, anywhere from 70 to 90%. In private conversations, some of those numbers are even more extreme because the alternative is just shut down the business, right?
Yeah.
And so there are all sorts of IP only sales where people are basically selling you their GitHub repo, and 3 months of principal engineer support to like navigate what's in there. There are others, they're doing $1 sales. If you remember, there was a high flying company called Zenefits. I want to say they peaked at a $4.5 billion paper valuation, and they were sold it for $1. Now they had some operational overhead that was why it was hard to find somebody to buy them, because somebody had to front the burn. And it's like, these are crazy numbers, for us to celebrate these kind of crazy wins. But in reality, what actually gets in your bank account after 5, 7, 10, 12 years of your life could be, effectively zero. It's a very, extreme emotional roller coaster that entrepreneurs can go through. And so to your question, the first thing I would say is, are you committed? And I think you just have to be honest with yourself. Like, in spite of all of what has happened, are you still committed to this customer, this problem, your team, this mission? And if no, you should start wrapping it up. And there's no shame in saying, like, I'm
Don't
not
drag it
going
out.
to commit. Yeah, but I don't believe in the halfway. And so, have one of those like deep honesty moments with yourself and say, are you committed? If you are committed, I believe the next step is to find whatever is the right framework for you to break up with your ego, because you're going to make so many bad decisions because friends and family are going to see what was working. You're going to go to events, or like, how's your startup doing? And don't fake it, right? Like, you need deep honesty, not just with yourself, but the people around you. And you got to break up with your ego to be able to pull that off. And the reason I think that's a dangerous balance is, if you start coming off indecisive or unsure, then your team's not sure if they want to commit. They're like off on LinkedIn looking for a job, like all sorts of other things happen. And so I do believe there's a way to be honest and open, but still confident, and saying, like, here's where we want to go. And that's just a maturity that comes with your leadership skills, but you got to break up with your ego. And so those are the first two things that are more mindset and personal development. Then it's like, all right, what's the tactical work to go get done? I would treat your business the same way a very aggressive private equity firm would if they were coming in and chopping you up for parts. And it means you have to be hyper apathetic. And maybe you hired some PR firm that you had a great relationship with, and you're kind of getting good benefit, but you're like, well, I still need some PR, so I'll keep that. Like, go cancel that. Maybe there is someone who's on a PIP or some development plan, and you're like, man, maybe I can make this work. You need to go lay that person off. Like, you have to go get hyper aggressive and get all the emotion out of the operational efficiency. And ideally, where you land up is one channel, one product, one end-to-end process. And if you do that, you're going to have extreme clarity on like how to manage your business effectively. And that may seem a bit sterile, but I believe that's the path to stay alive. And if folks, let's take a very simple scenario. Let's say somebody raised $1 million at a $5 million post, right? And post money. And there, that means they likely, with Preflix and all these types of things, they would need to sell that company for like $25 million for it to be considered, a success. But if you start doing all of this work that I just outlined, you might get to a point where it's like, crap, this is going to be like a $3 million business at best, like, annual run rate. And maybe you add, maybe it's SaaS or something that has really great margins. But like, it's never going to be massive. You need to go have a conversation with your board and say, are we deeply going to, like, are we going to stay committed to this VC path? Or are we willing to turn this into a cash machine? And again, it starts with, are you committed, right? Because if you're not committed, none of these questions make sense. If you have a weird board construction, they might pressure you in staying on the line, because guess what's happening right now? Many of these VCs, the general partners at these firms, they're finding out they're not good investors. And they're not just like, oh, we weren't like, no, that they suck. And they're under deep pressure. And in 2024, we're going to see a number of these firms close up shop. They can't raise another fund. Their paper valuations are going to get so low that, from a fiduciary standpoint, some of them may just have to close up shop and just return whatever's left. And they put it on autopilot. You can go hire these lawyers to go basically put your fund on autopilot, and they go do all the, tax balancing and blah, blah, blah. But a lot of these folks that maybe you saw at a conference or you saw on YouTube or whatever, they're not good investors. And as soon as their LP money goes away, they now have no power, right? And so it's this weird thing where it's just like they used to be the big man or woman on campus, and now they just have no power. And those are the same people who had a board seat who are telling you to do dumb stuff, right? And so I just, I'm not vindictive or like, feel weird about this. It's just a lot of folks who write articles on the tech media are not great journalists or don't have a ton of experience. A lot of investors who get a board seat because they wrote a check of a certain size were never operators. They don't have good, design or technical depth. Like I believe you got to have something. Like if someone says, I invest in SaaS businesses, and you were never a designer, you were never a PM, or you were never an engineer, I'm like, what real value are you going to add? Maybe you did something in sales or what have you, but this idea of someone who used to be on Wall Street and now they invest in tech companies, I'm not a fan of those types of funds because they can engineer their way financially to success, but like those are not the people you want supporting you along your journey. And so, like, I say all of this to say, if you get hyper apathetic about turning all of your bad decisions into very manageable, parts of a process, you're going to like remove those points of failure and what have you. You will end up with something that you really can turn into something valuable. But you got to make sure your support structure around you will allow that. And you may just have a board structure that says like, nope, you guys got to keep running. And that's your signal that this is probably going to go to zero, right? And we're going to have a lot of those, especially companies that were founded over the last 5 years. That's another reason I don't like these young companies. It's just too hard to figure out who's going to be, the next amazing winner, and then who's going to be, hey, everybody, proud to announce I just got this job at Meta and blah, blah, blah. Like, you see this all the time. And like, again, I'm not knocking that. I'm just saying, like, I'm using those as references to say this is how it ends in many cases. And so we celebrate the times where everything looks like it's great on paper. We need to look at the full movie. And it's okay when things don't work out. But let's not pretend those moments don't happen.
I think that is phenomenal advice. So, first of all, just to recap, be very intentional. If you are in the position of having raised venture and maybe you're facing austerity measures and the interest rate environment has changed, so you can't raise and you need to get profitable, get lean, you don't quite know what you're doing. First, be intentional. Are you going to do this or not? Check your ego, or actually just eradicate it, because it's not going to be pleasant and it's going to be eating shit for a long period of time. And then be very clear about just kind of ripping the business apart, being ruthless to kind of strip it down, reduce costs, be apathetic as you need to kind of do what the business needs to do to survive. And then be very clear about what you want to do from a capital structure. And if you don't need, if you have to get off the VC path, be willing to commit to that and have the tough conversations.
Absolutely.
Great advice. Two books that maybe could be useful there too would be Tony Hsieh, the founder of Zappos, Delivering Happiness. He went through a few periods like that. And Ben Horowitz's The Hard Thing About Hard Things, I think, talks about, again, everyone loves the dot-com boom. Everyone loves when things are going up and to the right. It's the true leaders show their stuff when they keep going in the hard times and do what needs doing, whether it's pleasant or not.
And sometimes that success is just staying alive. I mean, that's the premise of Seth Godin's The Dip. You got to know when to quit because it's just a sucky problem. But then also you have to know when to push through the bottom of that curve because that's where most people are giving up. And sometimes the win is just being able to push through that curve. And I'll give that to a callback that we talked about earlier. I think that's why you need to love your customers and your community. When it gets sucky, it needs to be people you care about. Otherwise, you're going to you're going to ask yourself, why do I keep showing up here?
LaSean, phenomenal advice. Thank you so much for coming on the show. If people want to connect with you, find out more about CAGR.com, find out more about what you're doing, where should they go?
Yeah. So, quick punch. I won't tell a whole story here, but CAGR is a acronym in finance for compound annual growth rate. It's a finance term for folks aren't on the nerdy side of those things. And the reason I chose that name is because it's not about just compounding our money, but our personal development, our relationships, our products, and a reminder that consistency, that 1% better every day is how we get to the win, is something that I hold deeply. And so anyone who is just interested in any of the things we talked about, or you potentially have an asset that you're trying to figure out what to do with, maybe you need capital or you're trying to sell the whole business, you can reach out to our group email at grow@cagr.com. And if you want to get in touch with me, I'm just LaSean or LaSean Smith, LaSean, on Twitter and LinkedIn.
Thanks so much for coming on the show.
Great to chat.